You saying that California, if they continue to aid and abet lawbreaking and harbor illegal immigrants, money from D.C. gets cut off?
Yeah, we're talking about conditions to this disaster.
Congressional Republicans are looking to punish Americans who lost everything in the recent wildfires in Southern California by withholding disaster relief aid unless the state governed exactly the way that they want them to govern, which puts me in a really difficult situation because, as everyone knows, there is no love lost between me and Gavin Newsom. I have been very critical of the Democratic leadership in this state. They have in fact mismanaged. They have in fact failed to prepare the state for the winds that were coming, the fire weather that we were all warned about a week prior to the devastating wildfires breaking out. But now the congressional Republicans are going beyond the mismanagement issues. Now all of a sudden, I'm hearing them bring up all these other strings that they want to attach to the relief aid. And I just want to remind everyone that our taxes, everyone who works and pays taxes, they are contributing to the federal resources that are supposed to be available if they lose everything as a result of a natural disaster, if they lose everything as a result of fires like the ones that broke out a week and a half ago in Los Angeles. So like the idea that we keep paying our taxes and we can't rely on any federal relief if a natural disaster strikes, just purely based on politics, is infuriating. So look, let's listen to the conversation between Sean Hannity and Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson so you get a sense of what I'm talking about here.
We're talking about conditions to this disaster. Look, there are natural disasters, but there are man-made disasters as well, and they made terrible decisions. You know, they knew exactly what they were doing. That reservoir outside Pacific Palisades, 117 million gallons, it was empty for a year. Why? They were trying to save a smelt fish or something. I mean, their policies are upside down. They made decisions that made that disaster exponentially worse, and this is what the American taxpayer is demanding of us everywhere else in the country.
Okay, there are things he said there that are true, but there's one major thing he said that is not true. He's totally misinformed about, and it's been kind of driving me crazy. The whole issue of, preserving smelt, right? The tiny little fish that they keep referring to, that had no impact on the water supply in Southern California. That is, in my opinion, an issue that needs to be addressed because we have not built water infrastructure to preserve water when it does rain. And it's ridiculous that that's the case when we live in a drought-prone state. So that does impact parts of California, right? The effort to save the smelt fish does impact the water supply in parts of California, but not Southern California. He is correct in noting that the Santa Ynez Reservoir in the Pacific Palisades was empty and had been empty for a year, but it wasn't because of the smelt, okay? It was empty because there was a tear on the floating cover of that reservoir. And it takes forever to fix a damn thing in this state because of environmental regulations, because of other regulations that are intentionally set to prevent the construction of new homes. Because let's keep it real, people want to maintain the value of their homes. And if you build more supply, then that might lower, just for a brief period of time, the value of their home. That really is the center of a lot of the dysfunction that we see in California when it comes to regulations and red tape, preventing us from building things or fixing things. So that is a problem, okay? Bringing up the reservoir, that's fine. Bringing up the mismanagement leading up to the fire, that's fine. I've spoken out against that. So if there's concern that the federal aid is going to be misspent, okay, or mismanaged by our politicians here in California, you could write the legislation or provide that aid, ensuring that the money ends up in the hands of the very people who lost everything as a result of these fires. But that's not the conversation we're having here. In fact, Mike Johnson wants to go further, and so Politico before I get to Politico, let's take a look at the next video, because here he talks about fire mismanagement, but then he brings up other issues. Let's take a look.
Would conditions be tied to defund, dismantle, no bail laws?
I think all those issues have to be addressed. When you're talking about disaster aid, you don't want to leave the people, who are really hurting without something because of the terrible political choices of their leaders. But we got to thread that needle the right way. But I think that what we're talking about here is restoring common sense, even in the state of California. Right. With the mandate we have, the responsibility we have, we're going to do that very thing.
Okay, so to be fair to Mike Johnson, he's not the one who brought up policies like defund the police or bail reform in California. Sean Hannity did. But to take that credit away from Mike Johnson, he agreed that those are the types of policies that they need to review in order to determine whether or not Californians who have paid into their federal taxes are deserving of disaster relief money. And I think that's unacceptable. I want to be clear that a lot of those policies I'm against. I wasn't against in the beginning, but once you saw the impact of some of those policies and how devastating they've been to cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, I am against those policies. It doesn't matter, that's a completely separate issue from disaster relief aid. The idea that Democrats would look at a state like North Carolina that suffered from hurricanes and severe weather conditions, people who lost everything in that state. The idea that Democrats would say, we don't like how Republicans are governing that state. And so we are going to hold federal relief money hostage, and we're gonna use that as leverage to get local lawmakers in that state to change their policies on a whole litany of issues that aren't even related to hurricanes or natural disasters. That is insane to me. I would be furious if Democrats did that, and I'm furious right now that Republicans are attempting to do this. And look, Mike Johnson argues, well, what? In other cases, with Hurricane Katrina is a good example. There were strings attached to that disaster relief money. No, there weren't. What is he talking about? Okay, let's get into the details about that, because as far as conditioning relief following Hurricane Katrina goes, the hurricane made landfall on August 29th, 2005. The Senate quickly approved $10.5 billion in aid for the victims on September 1st, 2005. So almost immediately, which was a good thing. That's what you're supposed to do. The House approved the measure the next day without any debate. And then President Bush requested an additional $51.8 billion on September 7th. Congress approved that funding package the next day. When people in America have been devastated by a natural disaster, you need to provide relief, not play politics. These people have lost, in some cases, everything. They've lost their homes, all of their possessions. They're desperately looking for a place to live in a state that has a housing shortage, and we're gonna talk about bail reform? What the hell does bail reform have to do with this? Politico wrote on the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, federal officials estimated that taxpayers had eventually laid out some $120 billion to deal with the after effects of the disaster. About $76 billion of that sum went to Louisiana projects, nearly 3 times the size of the state's annual budget. That's when Congress wasn't entirely broken. When Congress realized, the whole point of the federal government is to protect the people of the United States. Otherwise, what the hell is the point? Why the hell are we paying our taxes? I'm asking a genuine question here. Why the hell are we paying our taxes if that money doesn't go toward the people of this country, not only to make their lives better, but to rescue them when disaster strikes? Are we just paying our taxes to fund the Pentagon? Are we just paying our taxes to fund wars abroad? I'm being serious. What the hell am I paying my taxes for if I can't rely on the federal government to help the people of California after they've been victimized by devastating wildfires? And again, I want to reiterate, it is true that our Democratic leaders in this state have let us down. They have failed us. So I'm okay with the criticism toward Gavin Newsom or Karen Bass. And if anybody has a problem with attacking them or critiquing them because of their failed leadership, because they happen to be Democrats, kick rocks, because they did mismanage the lead up to these fires. But to punish the people of California, the people of Los Angeles, who have lost everything because you don't like the Democratic politicians who lead the state, I think that's ridiculous. If you want to provide that aid in a way that ensures the money gets into the hands of the actual victims, I'm fine with that. Because I don't really trust Gavin Newsom or Karen Bass either. But to bring up all these other issues, like bail reform and how you don't like that and how you might bring that up and use that as something you want changed in order to release some of the funds for disaster relief, I think that's unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable. There was a brief moment when Republican House Speaker Dennis Hassert, by the way, was questioning whether it was a good idea for American taxpayers to bankroll the rebuilding of New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina. And what happened was really interesting. So that record-breaking federal response wasn't assured when failed federally built levees left 80% of New Orleans underwater. Hassert, the Republican House Speaker at the time, told reporters that it looks like a lot of that place could be bulldozed. When asked whether the federal government should spend billions of dollars to rebuild the city, he said, "I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me." But he rightly received a lot of backlash from Americans across the country. Because guess what? Americans wanted to ensure their fellow Americans in New Orleans were made whole after that devastating hurricane hit, after the devastating floods happened. And so as a result, Hassert soon apologized for his remarks. He ultimately joined a bipartisan group of congressional leaders, along with President George W. Bush, in agreeing to support the aid package. Now look, again, California lawmakers dropped the ball, I totally agree. But we cannot condition the aid based on other non-natural disaster issues. And that's exactly what's happening here. While appearing on Meet the Press last weekend, Speaker Johnson was asked about whether Republicans will use the relief funds to leverage Democrats to get on board with other policies. And here you hear them bring up one other issue. Take a look at that.
Yeah, I want to tell you something that California Governor Gavin Newsom wrote recently. He said, quote, "There must be no conditions, no strings attached to disaster aid." And yet we know that there's a big conversation happening right now on Capitol Hill about linking disaster aid for California to an increase in the debt limit, which has been a traditionally really thorny issue. Are you and can you commit that California disaster relief won't have strings attached?
No, I won't commit that because we have a serious problem in California.
I don't think Mike Johnson is really concerned about the poor governance in California. I think Mike Johnson sees an opportunity, as do other Republicans in the party, to hold this money hostage, potentially punish Angelenos in order to get some policy wins, including an increase in the debt ceiling. So now we've heard about an increase in the debt ceiling, tying the disaster relief funds to that, tying the disaster relief funds to changes in bail reform policy in California. I mean, come on. And I would caution Republicans who are signing on to this, because if we're gonna set this precedent, I have no doubt in my mind that Democrats will turn around and do the same thing in Congress. And I don't wanna live in that world. I wanna live in a world where we actually take care of one another, understand the importance of backing our fellow Americans in their time of tragedy and when they need us the most. That's what real leaders and real lawmakers who wanna be public servants would do. And again, you wanna trash Newsom and Bass? I don't care, have at it. But do not add insult to injury and further punish the people of Los Angeles because you don't like the politicians in this state. I think that's unfair, and I think that's the wrong thing to do, especially when we're talking about people who have paid into their taxes and expect the federal government to be there for them when they need the federal government the most.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members, because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us, become a young Turk.